Between April and June of 1945, far out in the western Pacific, the small island of Okinawa became the stage of the last and bloodiest act of the Japanese Empire. It was here, surrounded by storms, smoke, and steel, that more than 110,000 Japanese soldiers vanished into the fog of war. Not all died in combat. Many disappeared into the labyrinth of tunnels, into the rain, into silence. Their fate would be remembered as the final echo of the ancient code of Bushido, the way of the warrior that refused surrender, even when the world itself was collapsing. Okinawa was not just another island. It was the final step before the Japanese homeland, a gateway standing between the invading armies of the United States and the ancient capital of Tokyo. The island's hills, coral cliffs, and rice fields would soon become the last stronghold of the Empire of the Rising Sun. Every soldier knew what the fall of Okinawa meant. Once lost, the homeland would have no shield left. To them, this was not merely a battle for territory, but a sacred struggle for existence itself. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, understood that victory was impossible. His mission was not to win, but to delay, to make the enemy pay so dearly that they might question any invasion of Japan itself. Beneath his calm and stoic exterior, he carried the weight of a nation's final hope. Ushijima ordered his men to turn the island's southern hills into a fortress of stone and darkness. They would not meet the Americans on the beaches. Instead, they would vanish underground, waiting for them to come. Under the rocky soil of Okinawa, thousands of soldiers dug into the earth like ghosts preparing for eternity. They carved miles of tunnels and bunkers, linking entire divisions beneath the hills. The earth became their shield and their tomb. Deep in those tunnels, they prepared food, ammunition, and their final letters home, sealing them away from the sunlight. Above ground, the silence was deceptive. Only the wind moved across the hills where death was already waiting unseen. At the heart of this invisible fortress stood the ancient Shuri Castle. Once a symbol of Okinawan royalty and peace, it was now the brain of Japan's southern defense. Artillery positions surrounded it, and command posts filled its courtyards. Beneath its red walls and tiled roofs, generals whispered through radio static, giving orders that would decide the fate of tens of thousands. Shuri became both a shrine and a prison, the center of resistance, destined to burn under the endless fire of war. Facing this hidden army, the United States assembled one of the greatest invasion forces in human history. Hundreds of warships stretched across the horizon, and the sky filled with the black silhouettes of bombers. The sea itself trembled under the sound of engines and explosions. When the first shells fell upon the beaches of Okinawa, the earth shook like a living thing. The invasion had begun, and the island that had been green and alive would soon become a wasteland of ash and rain. As the Americans landed, they found an eerie emptiness. No resistance greeted them at first. Fields lay silent, villages deserted, and the tropical air was heavy with tension. The Japanese had vanished from sight, but they were there, watching from the hills, hidden in the stone, waiting for the order to strike. The calm before the storm lasted days, and every soldier on both sides felt the weight of an invisible enemy pressing down upon them. When the hidden guns finally spoke, they tore through the silence like thunder. Artillery from the ridges exploded among the advancing troops, and machine guns opened from unseen holes in the hillsides. The Americans realized too late that they were walking into a perfectly designed trap, one that would cost tens of thousands of lives. Okinawa became a battlefield of smoke and mud, of fire and rain, where the line between life and death blurred into the same gray mist that hung over the cliffs. The rain never stopped. It fell endlessly, turning the ground into rivers of red clay, washing away footprints and hope alike. Soldiers on both sides fought not only the enemy, but the storm itself. The Japanese defenders clung to their tunnels, moving like shadows through the darkness. Each day they were fewer, hungrier, and weaker, but still they fought. For them, surrender was unthinkable. Their code demanded endurance beyond pain, loyalty beyond death. As days turned to weeks, the Americans pushed slowly south, capturing one hill at a time at a terrible cost. Every ridge had a name, Every name had a price. The castle of Shuri fell beneath a storm of fire that erased centuries of history in minutes. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but ruins and silence. Yet beneath those ruins, the fight continued, unseen but unbroken, as if the spirit of the island itself refused to yield. By the end of 82 days, Okinawa was no longer an island. It was a grave. Over 110,000 Japanese soldiers were gone, their positions obliterated, their names lost to mud and sea. The code of Bushido had burned with them, its final expression written in sacrifice and silence. The survivors, few and hollow-eyed, emerged from their tunnels to find a world that no longer existed. The empire they had died to protect was already crumbling. The Battle of Okinawa was not only the end of Japan's armies, it was the end of an era. It was the moment when honor met futility, when courage could no longer change fate. The wind that swept across the island carried with it the ashes of the old Japan and the first breath of the new one. In that storm of steel and sorrow, the warriors of the empire were lost, not defeated but consumed, and history called it simply the end of Bushido. First, 1945, brought with it a roar that echoed across the island. From the horizon, an endless line of ships emerged from the gray sea, more than 1,000 of them, advancing in perfect synchronization, like a floating wall. The skies were covered with aircraft that buzzed like swarms of steel. It was the beginning of the largest amphibious landing in the Pacific. Operation Iceberg had begun. For hours, the cannons of the U.S. fleet thundered against the coast. The mountains trembled and the earth seemed to breathe dust and fire. Yet when the Allied soldiers reached the sand, something unsettling happened. There was no resistance. The beaches were empty. No gunfire, no ambush. Only the silence of a trap. As the American forces moved inland, believing the Japanese defense had been obliterated by the bombardment, the true guardians of Okinawa waited in the shadows. Miles beneath the ground, thousands of Japanese soldiers watched in absolute silence through damp, dark tunnels. They waited for the order to strike, disciplined, motionless, breathing the heavy air of the earth. For an entire week, the advance was easy. The Americans occupied the northern part of the island without resistance. But then came the counterattack. Japanese artillery erupted as if the earth itself had come alive. From the hills, a storm of fire fell upon the invaders. Every hill, every cave, every stone hit a firing position. It was an invisible war, where enemies were not seen until it was too late. The sound was constant. Distant explosions, rain striking helmets, shouted orders in languages mixed with the wind. Mud covered everything, and the sky, always gray, seemed to press down on the men. Okinawa became a borderless hell. The Japanese soldiers had sworn never to retreat. They fought not for victory but for honor. Some wrote letters that would never be sent, leaving notes on tunnel walls, farewell words that time would erase. In the darkness, Bushido, the warrior's code, became an invisible chain binding them to sacrifice. The U.S. forces responded with overwhelming artillery. The hills were demolished one after another, yet beneath every ruin, defenders still remained. It was a battle of attrition, a struggle between determination and inevitability. The Japanese moved like shadows through collapsed tunnels, emerging to attack and disappearing again into the earth. Every yard gained cost dozens of lives. Shuri Castle became the epicenter of the battle. Once a symbol of Okinawan royalty, it was now a fortified command post where the fate of thousands was decided. The May rains fell relentlessly, turning the ground into a swamp. Tanks got trapped, the wounded sank into the mud. No one could escape the smell of gunpowder and death that hung in the air. As the Americans advanced inch by inch, General Mitsuru Ushijima remained calm. He knew defeat was inevitable, but every day of resistance was a symbolic victory. His goal was not to win, but to prove that Japan would never surrender without fighting to the end. The Maeda caves in the south became living tombs. Japanese soldiers shared their last supplies, rationing water drop by drop. Some sang ancient songs, others prayed in silence. The thought of surrender was unthinkable. Many chose to vanish into the shadows of the tunnels rather than be captured. On May 29th, the Americans finally broke through the defensive line of Shuri Castle. What they found was not a fortress full of soldiers, but a field of ruins. General Ushijima had ordered the quietest withdrawal of the entire war. Thousands of men slipped away under the cover of night, abandoning the symbol of their resistance, but not their spirit. The south of Okinawa then became the last circle of hell. The hills turned into labyrinths where every cave was defended to the last man. The exhausted American forces advanced through craters and smoke. Each step was a reminder that victory on this island carried a price few were willing to pay. Meanwhile, in the skies, kamikaze pilots launched ceaseless attacks. Young Japanese pilots, barely trained, hurled their planes against enemy ships. It was the final echo of Bushido. Total devotion to a cause, even when that cause was already lost. More than 1,500 suicide attacks were carried out during the battle. Many failed, but each left a deep psychological scar. The numbers grew with each passing day. The missing multiplied until no one could count them anymore. Some were lost in collapsed tunnels, others in burned forests. Others simply vanished into the sea mist. 110,000 soldiers of the Japanese Empire, scattered across an island, turned into a silent graveyard. The end came in June. The last Japanese positions, surrounded without ammunition or food, sent their final radio message. We continue fighting until the end, and then silence. General Ushijima, true to his code, took his own life alongside his chief of staff, General Cho. Not in despair, but in ritual calm. It was the symbolic closure of Bushido. Okinawa had fallen. For the Americans, it was a strategic victory, but a bitter one. More than 12,000 U.S. soldiers were killed and another 50,000 wounded. The island lay in ruins, fields burned, villages reduced to ashes. For Japan, Okinawa was an open wound, not only for the lives lost, but for the message it left to the world. If a single island had cost this much, what would happen if the Allies invaded the Japanese mainland? That question changed the course of history, driving the Allies to seek another way to end the war. In the silence that followed, the surviving Japanese soldiers emerged from the tunnels like shadows. Their faces were covered in soot and dust, their uniforms torn. They walked among ruins they no longer recognized. They had fulfilled their duty, but at a cost only they could understand. The rain kept falling over Okinawa, as if the sky itself mourned the tragedy. On every hill, in every tunnel, in every corner of that small but immortal island, remained the echoes of a vow that marked the end of an era. Bushido had fulfilled its final promise.